today is a question box service. We do this once a year, and that means that instead of a sermon, I will answer on the spot without seeing them in advance any and all questions that you have about the church, Unitarian Universalism, or theology, or me. These are great questions. Okay, what was the turning point or event or conversation in which you knew absolutely that you wanted to become a UU minister? It's such a generous question. So for me, I grew up had a wonderful experience growing up at a Unitarian Universalist church outside of Boston with great ministers and mentors and no conception at all that this was a job that people did with their life. I went to college and I fell in love with the study of religion and was a comparative religion and philosophy major, which is maybe not a surprise. But I graduated and went straight on. Graduated, and Terry and I moved in together and got married that summer, and both started at divinity school 2 weeks later, and are still married to this day, which is amazing. In the best possible sense of amazing. It's good. But it took me years in seminary before I even decided that this was what I wanted to do and not academics. And I don't know that there was any one turning point or moment for me where I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I have such respect and admiration for people who have known, some of you probably have known since you were this tall, this is what I am doing with my life. Some days I still feel tentative. I'm gonna do this, we're gonna see how this goes. But for me, the thing that was the turn was somewhere along the way in grad school, I realized that the thing that I was most interested in studying was the title of the course. Say again, the title of that course was? What do I believe? Why do I believe it? And what difference does it make? And as far as I could see at that time in the academic world, people didn't get to spend very much time asking the question, what difference does it make? That's the thing I care about. I love talking about history and philosophy and ideas and possibilities because the thing I care about is, well, what difference does that make? What's your favorite color and why? So we're sort of switching up the feel of questions here. There's a very specific color that is approximated around here sometime. But I grew up outside of Boston, and the color of a salt marsh in the late afternoon sun, sometime in, August at about 6:30, there is like this golden glow that sometimes, like the fields around here, in the afternoon sun will approximate that, but it's not quite the same. It's very specific. What leadership development opportunities are there at UUCB? This is such a great question. So this last fall, we did a leadership class for the first time since before pandemic. And we had 15 or 20 folks who went through these sessions, and it was so great and engaging. And all of the conversation coming out of it was, okay, how do we do this again and more? In some ways, I think leadership development in this context is not about how do you run a meeting or use Google Docs, though both of these are important questions. Really, it's what does leadership look like in this context? What does leadership look like in a congregationally governed church where the ultimate authority is the congregation as a whole? Where the board, and in fact, we just talked about this at the last board meeting this week, where the work of the board sitting around the table is not what do we sitting around the table want to do, but so much of, all right, what do we hear and feel and know from the congregation as a whole? What are the gaps that we feel? What are the things that are working well that we want to support? So leadership development does all of that. The other big leadership development, if you are interested in worship leadership development specifically, the first full week in June, and I recognize this is not accessible to everyone, so we're figuring out other possibilities for next year. But the first full week in June, which is something like the 3rd through the 8th, something like that, we're going to do each day a worship retreat. which I still want to call worship summer camp. But it's going to be a preaching class that walks folks through from never having gotten up in front of a room behind a mic before at all, through having something to share in one of the lay services in the year ahead. Talks about the why and the how, and why do we do this thing? Why is the shape of our worship service what it is? And then Emily, our new music director, is going to pair that together with song leading and community singing. So if you want to get deep into worship leadership, mark your calendar now. I would love to talk with you more about that. Is faith a choice? I was a philosophy major. I don't know. It's so many things. You know, I don't assume that the questioner just proposes a binary to it, but it's shaped by so many things. I think sometimes yes and sometimes no. You know, there are folks I'm sure you know in your life for whom their faith does not feel like a choice at all. Either this is the thing they grew up with and it's unimaginable to move elsewhere, or this is a thing that some of you in this room are here because it was unimaginable to stay in the faith that you were in before. So it's complicated. And then even what is faith? You know, is faith the set of things that you believe? Is faith really the way that you're living your life and the things you're doing? I feel like the answer to all of these questions is, well. It's complicated, though. I think it's different for different folks and for different reasons for different folks, too. And it changes. Maybe this is the place I'll land in. Louis Pasteur, the scientist, the inventor of pasteurization, says, chance favors the prepared mind. Chance favors the prepared mind. And I feel that way a little bit around faith development, too. I don't know that I could wake up tomorrow and choose to believe in something in particular. But I think that I could, and in fact, I think part of what we do when we gather is we're sort of preparing our hearts. You know, we're preparing to be people who are ready for a spiritual experience if and when it comes, who are ready for a deepening of compassion and connection with each other, which I think is also faith. We're preparing ourselves to be living out the things that we actually believe in the world. And in that way, it's like the combination of genetics, nature and nurture too, right? Like we're putting ourselves in a position for something to emerge. Since we're so close to CU, is there any campus ministry? There has been really effective campus ministry in the past, in the pre-COVID days. I think there will be again. There isn't right now. And for better or for worse, it's tough to imagine that in this coming year. Having said that, the other answer to almost anything that goes on at this church is, are you really passionate about this? Let's talk. And I mean that genuinely. Some of these I'm passing over because they're duplicates or because they're really big. How do you stay so positive? People bring you problems and difficult situations, but you remain, it seems, positive. The other half of these questions where the answer isn't is, I don't know, what do you think? Suggestions? The floor is open. How do you stay positive? I think a few things. One of them is not minimizing or avoiding or denying the reality that I am not a positive person all the time. That, in fact, inside of my head, on a regular basis, what I am thinking about is not deep thoughts, but catastrophizing every possible thing that could go wrong in the church, in my life, with my, on and on, right? I think some of you do that also. And being honest about that with yourself, this is a thing I'm doing. rather than pretending that's not what's going on. I think another piece of it, I'm forgetting the acronym for this, but the hungry, angry, halt. Say it louder.
Lonely, tired.
Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Halt. Part of being positive is also, is saying, all right, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? This is not the time to show up to someone pretending that I am otherwise than I am. This is the time to eat something, take a nap, give someone a call and talk with them. It's tending to what is that internal world. And I feel like it's not that I'm, well, maybe this is the last thing I'll say. It's not that I am an optimistic person. I'm not an optimistic person in the sense that I don't think that things will inevitably go well. I really don't. I don't think they're going to inevitably go bad either, but I don't think they're going to inevitably going well. But I am, I think, a hopeful person, which is believing in the possibility, in the plausibility of the possible. And I think that gets read as positivity, where more it's about plausibility. With the masses of scientific evidence piling up about the polycrisis, how do we help to heal the world? So some of the questions are big. That's such a good question, though. I mean, this is such a brief answer, but the place that I go back to when faced with the overwhelm of the world and what do we do is Arthur Ashe, the tennis player and the activist, says, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And it's, to me, that's so clarifying. I can't fix all of the things. What is the one thing that I can't fix? I don't have all of the tools at my disposal. What do I have? I can't do everything. There's another, oh man, I'm forgetting his name now. Some Unitarian minister a century ago says, no, we're going to come back to that because I can't remember it. It's the same thought. It's on the same lines. That sense, you can't do everything, but you can do something. And I won't let the everything that I can't do keep me from the something that I can. That's not about specifics as much as it is about process. I think the other thing, though, the best thing that any one single person can do is not to try to do it by yourself. But who are the partners who are doing the kind of work that's important and doing it well, and how do you help them do it even better? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? I love this because this is both a biology lesson and a dad joke. First, the biology lesson. Definitely the egg comes first because the mutation happens, in embryo, and then it develops into the chicken. So the animal that becomes the chicken. Okay. Second, though, and the staff team and maybe some others have heard me say it, this is one of my favorite dad jokes. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Safety always comes first. How does this congregation welcome and encourage diverse theologies and ultimologies? I think one of the things that we try to keep coming back to is the sense that what unites us in this room, what unites us with Unitarian Universalists across the country and around the world, is not a shared set of theological and philosophical propositions about exactly what the nature of reality is, but instead a shared set of values, and in some ways a profound agnosticism on a corporate level. However certain you may be of your own truth, the sense of agnosticism that this is my experience. My experience is so rooted and grounded in this sense, and maybe that is not even resonant with the person sitting next to me. And that doesn't mean that something's gone wrong. In fact, it means it's working as it should. I have something to learn from them that informs my journey, and maybe they have something to learn from me. That's their business, not mine. I think continuing to name that from the front of the room and in conversation with each other. I think also in that, the passionate thing to awaken and evoke, I think for all of us, is this holy curiosity. I'm gesturing to Tom because he's nearby, you've had this profound spiritual experience of an encounter with the divine that is so far out of anything I've ever had that it doesn't even start to make sense to me. The response is not and is never, well, you idiot. And I'm saying that to make the subtext text, because the way that often that response comes out is, oh, okay. Which feels even worse, It's even harder to shake that. I apologize. I feel bad. But is this curiosity that says, instead, it is, oh, I have never experienced, what was that like for you? What did you think it was going to be like, and what is it like now? How has that shifted things for you? That conversation, those conversations that we have with each other, I have a really high level of trust that everyone in this house does share the same values. I don't need to convince you to share those values. But when we get into that conversation about spiritual experience, I want to know, what is that thing like for you? I don't want to convince you that you're wrong. And I've been in UU congregations and communities where the ethos and the culture was, let's prove why you're wrong. I don't care. Ooh, emphatic. Holy curiosity. Oh, this is so good. What sacred text do you read to deepen your faith search? Is there a new way we can share sacred texts, inspirational reading? Yeah, this is so good. There are so many folks, I think, in this community for whom reading is one of the big spiritual paths that you follow. For me, that's looked really different at different times in my life. These past couple of years, the practice around that's been interesting to me is going back to texts that I already know and trying to go deeper and unpack more layers to them. I grew up with the parables of Jesus just sort of nebulously floating in the background. And there's so much just fascinating scholarship on what did that mean or look like in the context that those were shared, and to read commentary. I do this with the Passover Haggadah each year. It's a really simple story of, this is the order of service that Jews follow during Passover to sort of retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And I go back each year to read new commentary on this, and I sort of feel like it's fascinating to me to take the same text and just sort of, do a little bit of this and that. The other thing related to that, though, is not to get too solution-oriented, but there's a UUCB Google group that gets a little bit of traffic each week. You should sign up for it, send an email to the office if you want to get on it. So it'd be a great question to pose, because I'm so curious what you all are reading, too, and getting from. I've read a lot more fiction this year, too, than I have in years past, science fiction and fantasy, and sort of finding narrative that's true without being real, or that's real without being true, whatever the right frame is. What does UU culture and commentary say about the feeling and practice of vengeance and retribution, and how can we oppose it? This is my own personal curiosity. Did any of you watch season 5 of Fargo? Yeah, it is this question yeah. Okay, for the record, that was one person in this room. And I don't automatically, it's sort of a rough, violent mystery detective, Midwestern kind of a show. So it's not like a blanket endorsement, but it's wrestling with this thing of retribution. I think that the starting point for that, though, and I think part of our essential spiritual work is to believe that other people are as real as we are and as possessed of inherent worthiness and dignity as we are, that we are human beings among human beings. And I think returning to that again and again, there's a million ways to get anchored in that. I think fundamentally that is the roots or the grounds for undoing it. Let me come back to that. That's a good question to come back to at more length, too. Where should I turn when my world feels too small? Sometime my usual comforts, friends, poetry, and so on, feel so far out of reach, and I don't know where to find guidance. That is such a big, good question. Some of these questions I want to just be like, turn to the person next to you. See what they have to say about that. I know those times too. Sometimes that looks like depression. Sometimes that's season. Sometimes that's winter, and food doesn't taste as good, and the light's not as bright, and the music that you loved in the summer is just sort of there. So that's some of it sometimes. I think the first piece of it, though, is starting from the inside out and saying that I don't know how many folks this resonates for, but I'll just put it out there. That sense that it doesn't mean that you're bad or broken or something's gone irreversibly wrong. I think it starts with compassion towards yourself. And maybe it's also doing something different. It's try a thing that you haven't done before. Maybe also in that, I think often depression, but also the whole spectrum between deep, severe clinical depression and whatever normal is, a category I'm increasingly suspicious of. We often don't talk about that stuff with other people at all. And I feel like part of the work in those sorts of moments is to say, who is the person in your life who can hear you saying this and won't immediately try to run away from that reality? No, you're really fine. Great, that's not helpful. Won't try to immediately fix it. Oh, come to a movie with me tomorrow and you'll be fixed. No, that's also not what I'm saying. But who can hear the fullness of that experience for you so that you're not just carrying it alone. There's so many more questions. We won't go through all of them. If there's a question that I don't get to, though, I would love to sit down over coffee or lunch and chat about it. Oh, that's so good. How can I stay connected to my spirituality while also making space for the confusion and pain of the state of our world? My first response is to pass the buck. So our previous minister, Kelly Dignan's going to be back here in a few weeks on a Sunday afternoon, the second Sunday in February, leading a workshop on climate grief. And it's this piece of what do we do with this overwhelming awfulness of facing the future of climate and the grief that's related, this sort of unanswerable grief. So see what she says. But I also think part of it is I think it's really important to hold grief and joyfulness and not try to balance both of these things together. It's not that things are this bad, but I'm going to have this much good experience and it's going to balance it out. I think that's actually a running away. I think instead it's developing the practice of both, that both of these things are true. That Someone once said that the preacher's job is to tell you that you are completely screwed and make you feel okay about it. And that's actually not my job. That is all of our collective jobs, right? It is both that on the one hand, we kind of are, and also that's not the whole story. That no one story is the whole story, and cultivating the practice and experience of that. Oh, okay. They're so good. So good. Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good question. Goodness. None of these are brief questions. Oh, that's such a good question. Okay, sorry, I should be sharing these too. Let me just share the questions instead. Should one allow everything to be how it is? Or should one engage in order to work and support and drive change you want to see in the world? The second one. This is like the lightning round. Do you believe in a personal God? Sometimes I've had experiences that make sense in that context, but most of the time, that's not the experience I have. I feel like, for me, I'm going to reword the question, sorry. A more interesting question here is not do you believe in a personal God, but have you had the experience of a personal God? Is this a feeling or a relationship that you've been in over time? And a lot of you have, and I mostly haven't, but I get it. We draw from many traditions and sources. Are there some we haven't explored yet and look forward to exploring? Yeah, so much. I was in conversation with someone earlier this week saying, what would it look like to go deeper in exploring mystical experience? My hunch, what I told them, is that a whole bunch of people in this room have had mystical experiences that do not make sense in any way, and that we're not talking about very much. And what could it look like to have a container to talk about some of those things? I think that'd be really interesting. How do you feel about the resignation of the president of Harvard? That's where I went to grad school. I feel like that was a total witch hunt motivated by political reasons. What are useful prayers for anxiety, impatience, and indecision? A mentor told me years ago, when you can't pray for the thing itself, pray for the willingness to have that thing. I can't pray myself into not feeling anxious, but if you feel like you can't, maybe you can pray for the willingness to let go of your anxiety. Pray for the willingness to let go of your impatience. Pray for the acceptance of your own indecision for now. Wow, regarding free will, how do I align my desire to conceive a child with my deep concern that I cannot confer with this child and agree that they ought to be born into this world? This is like a beautiful question of how do you respect the autonomy and the personhood of a person that isn't. Really, I think this is a paradox. I don't know that there's a way out of that one. Sorry. Why is God rarely mentioned in your services? Wow, that's a great question. Here's what I think. I think that that's not my first language. And I feel an awareness that I speak of God like a person who learned a second language as an adult. And on the one hand, it's so vitally important for me to say, yes, this makes sense. If this is your feeling and experience and language, you absolutely, unequivocally have a home here, and peers for whom that's their same language. But I think unconsciously I often avoid it because that's not my first language, which doesn't mean that that's not the right language. I take that as a good challenge. Okay, I'm going to leave it there with only like 15 more questions to go. Here's where I'm really leaving it, though. I don't think that I'm up here at the front of the room because actually I have solutions and precise, exact answers. I expect that at least several times during this process, you thought to yourself, well, that was very unsatisfying. I think that we do this service not because I am the font of wisdom to dispense it all, but instead for two other reasons. First, to say, asking these questions and so many others is a core part of what it is to be a spiritual person alive in the world. And there's no point, even after philosophy and comparative religion majors, even after years of divinity school, even after decades of the career, in which these stop being good, worthy questions to ask, with many different kinds of answers. There's no point at which we graduate from that class that asks, what do I believe and why do I believe it and what does that mean to me? And so in doing it, the work first is to say this is a core part of how we do religion, and the work second is to say this isn't just my work, this is all of our work. You have answers to every one of these questions, too. Answers that are informed by deep thoughtfulness, an experience which may be profoundly different from mine and everyone else in the room. Our work together is to wrestle with these questions, to trust that living the questions is itself something worth spending our lives on.